Welcome to MilSpouse Matters, the podcast dedicated to encouraging military spouses. Need some inspiration as you navigate military life, moves, deployments, raising military kids, keeping your marriage together, career issues, and more? Get an encouraging, humorous outlook from a spouse who's been there for 30 years. Join host Jen McDonald, author of You Are Not Alone, Encouragement for the Heart of a Military Spouse, who knows that we're stronger together. Jen also writes regularly for outlets such as Military Spouse Magazine and has been featured in numerous books and national publications. Grab a cup of coffee or a glass of wine and sit back and relax as Jen talks with military spouses both new and experienced who will give you realistic hope and support for your own MilSpouse journey.
Hey, it's Brittany.
Hey, it's Leslie.
We're from the MilSpouse Coffee House podcast.
And you're listening to MilSpouse Matters with Jen McDonald. Enjoy!
Hey guys, it's Jen. Welcome to this episode. I'm so glad you're here with me today. If you're a longtime listener, I really appreciate your faithfulness, especially with my hit or miss podcast publishing at the beginning of this year. And if this is your first time, if you're a first-time listener, I'm so glad you're here today. Before I jump in to today's episode, I wanted to mention that my guest, Elaine Brye, is giving away a copy of her book, Be Safe, Love Mom. So just head over to my Instagram account, MilSpouse Matters, to get more information about how to enter that. Also, there is a Christian Military Spouses Facebook group. All you have to do is search for Christian Military Spouses on Facebook, answer the couple of questions so that we can verify you're a military spouse, and we'll just get you right in. So it's a great place for some support and encouragement. I wanted to introduce you to today's guest. Her name is Elaine Brye, and you may have heard of her. Like I said, she's the author of the book, Be Safe, Love Mom, and she was a military kid, military wife, and now she is the mom of 4 active duty, 1 each in the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines, and she has been through 14 deployments with her kids. So she totally gets the teary goodbyes, empty chairs at holidays, and sleepless hours waiting for phone calls in the night. Here's part of her bio. In Be Safe, Love Mom, Elaine braids together her own personal experiences with those fellow parents she's met along the way. She offers gentle guidance and hard-earned wisdom on topics ranging from that first anxious goodbye to surrendering all control of your child, from finding comfort in the support of the military community and the healing power of faith to coping with the enormous sacrifices life as a military mother requires. You can find her at BeSafeLoveMom.com as Mama Brye, Brye on Twitter, Elaine Brye on Instagram, and also she has a pretty active Facebook page, Be Safe Love Mom Elaine Brye. She has so much great insight and information to share. And honestly, I will tell you this, it's not just for military parents. If you are a military spouse and you want your family to better understand what you're going through, I would highly recommend you send this episode to your in-laws and your parents, and then listen to get the perspective of parents. I think she does an amazing job of talking about the different ways we face military life as parents. I totally get it because our son is now in as well, and it is different. I really hope you enjoy this episode, and I always love to hear from you. Thanks again for listening. Hey everyone, and thanks for joining me today for this episode of the MilSpouse Matters podcast. Today, I'm so excited to be speaking with Elaine Brye. So hello and welcome, Elaine.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
I'm so glad you're here. And I should have asked you before we started recording, did I pronounce your name correctly?
That's correct. In fact, that's one of the reasons why one of my son's first call sign was Cheddar, Brye like the cheese, except it's not Brie, it's Brye.
That's cute. Well, before we get too far into talking about your work and your writing, I know that you just finished the Bataan Memorial March. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about that because that was last week, right?
Right. So I did the honorary portion, 14.2 miles, and it's to honor those who were survivors of the Bataan Death March, which was a horrific situation that happened during World War II. But I also did it for me. I had shirts made. I had a couple friends who did it with me, also military moms, and it said for the mamas who waited then and who wait now. Because I always think about those moms in the other conflicts. I think about those World War II moms who maybe didn't get a letter for months or years, much less a text message or a phone call. Yeah. when you love somebody in the military, you serve as well and you sacrifice. And so that's one of the reasons I did it. I also did it because one of my kids is almost done with his 14th deployment for me as a mom. And when I'm going through, when I have one of my children in harm's way, I have to find some way to suck up energy. And when you train to walk 14.2 miles in the desert, that helps. So it was very moving.
Yeah. I've wanted to do that one, and I've thought about doing it. I was telling you, my brother has done it. He ran the marathon, which I'm like, I can't even imagine running through the sand. But I'm sure that seeing the folks out there, the veterans, just kind of gives you strength to keep
wounded
going.
warriors marching as well, and survivors' families. It does powers you. And I'm always looking for sources of ways to charge my batteries. That's for sure.
Well, and you said 14 deployments for your kids, right? So, wow. My son just returned from his first. I just was so surprised because I've been through it as a spouse multiple times. And as a mom, it's such a different perspective. And I remember running on the treadmill or doing things hard physically. And I would go, you know what? This is nothing compared to what he's going through. You can do this. Like you said, it kind of gives you something to focus on other than your worry, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah. So I grew up as an Army brat, and both my mom and dad were in the Army, and I was my mom's honorable discharge when she got pregnant with me. Back in those days, you couldn't serve and be pregnant, and I grew up in that Army life, and my father served in Vietnam. I ended up marrying an Air Force pilot. And so when my first son decided that he wanted to pursue a military life, I thought I knew everything there was to know about it.
Right?
And
it's not the same.
And as he stood there taking his oath to defend and protect the Constitution, I was just slammed with this torrid emotions because this was my baby. This was and so it was very different. And even though I grew up in the military and married the military, it was very, very different to have my children.
Well, it's interesting because my husband went to Afghanistan for a year. He's been overseas, Middle East multiple times, and I just kind of powered through it. And, we had 4 kids at home at that time. It was before he retired. So when my son left, they have a 2-year-old. And it's interesting the way your perspective changes. I was like, we should not be doing this to families and tearing them apart. And I thought, when it was us, I just like, okay, we just got to get through it. And I don't know if it's just the mom protective thing, but it just seemed so wrong. Right.
Right. Well, what I tell other moms is, when I met my husband, he was a warrior. He was a grown man. My father was a warrior. He served in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. I grew up with this vision of him as a warrior.
Yeah, but when you already knew him as that.
When I met my children, they were tiny babies, and it was my mission to keep them alive. And I did everything I could to do that. And so to transition from this child that I put 100% of my energy into raising and protecting and helping them become their best that I could do, and then switching into they are trained warriors, that's a huge mental shift.
It sure is. I love the way you word that, because it is. We met them as babies and you just can't stop seeing them that way.
No. But in order to survive as a military mom, I had to switch my mindset. And that's one of the biggest pieces of advice that I give to mothers as they anticipate basic training, as they anticipate deployments, is you have got to change the way that you are thinking of them. For example, you cannot think about basic training and all the terrible, difficult things they're going to have to go to and wanting to protect them from that. You want it to be hard. You want them to know what they're overcome their limitations. You want them to be able to handle anything that is thrown at them because of what they may be called to do in the future. And so changing your mindset from, how can he yell at them like that?
My little precious Schmoopy. Yeah.
To, bring it. And that's the reason why our kids choose that as well.
Yeah.
They're choosing it because they know they want to be their best. And this is helping them be their best and follow their calling. So that's one of the huge things that ways that helps me. And I try and help other moms adjust to that.
I think what you're doing is so amazing. And we are giving away a copy of her book called Be Safe, Love Mom, which is for military parents. And there will be more information about that in the notes and at the end of the show. But I love that term, Be Safe, Love Mom, because I think we all say that, right?
Right. Exactly.
So did it surprise you that your kids went into the military?
Oh, yes. I mean, although I came from such a background of military and my husband was military when I fell in love with him, he ended up choosing to leave the Air Force because he grew up on a farm and he wanted to raise his kids on a farm. So we ended up, he was an airline pilot, and we had a farm in rural Ohio, and we were in a completely non-military area. And I knew my oldest, when he was 4, told us he wanted to be Top Gun. And we had a video version, edited video version. Too bad you can't do that with DVDs, but we had and he would sit there and he would fly missions with a little plastic football hat on.
Oh my goodness.
And he is
destiny.
And he is now a Marine F-18 pilot. So he was the one that had that focus. But the others, it was really a complete shock. Our next son was in high school during 9/11, and that impacted him. Our daughter, she's a real go-getter, and apparently she decided when she was 13 at induction day at the Naval Academy when our oldest son started his journey. And our youngest one said he was not going to join the military. He was not going to be a clone. He was not going to be the fourth Brye. And then during his senior year of high school, he shocked us by turning down football recruiting offers and took a ROTC scholarship at the University of North Dakota to be a helicopter pilot. And I was like, can I just have one that's going to live next door?
All your kids are currently serving, correct?
Yes.
You have so much insight into the life of a military parent. And one of the things we were talking about before we started recording was wanting to kind of bridge that gap between the military spouse and perhaps the in-laws. And what would you suggest to military spouses to remember about the parents of that active duty person?
Well, isn't that such a charged word, mother-in-law? I mean, It's just a joke, right? And
right.
And family can be hard, and family can be stressful. But if you would just remember that that's her baby, that's how she sees them, even though it's annoying because you see them as a grown man, or if it's her daughter. But the biggest thing I would say is the one thing where I see a lot of breakdown is we are just desperate for communication, especially when our children are deployed. And one of my unique backgrounds is my husband ended up, after retiring, flying for an airline in Afghanistan. And I spent a year teaching in Kabul in 2010 and 11. Wow. So I lived in a war zone, and I lived in a compound, and I would go to chapel at Camp Eggers and interact with the military people there. But I got a sense of what deployment can be like in a difficult place. And I understand that pressure of how hard it is to stay in communication. You get so tired of only being able to email. And so I get it that the first person that my kids want to talk to is their spouse. I totally understand that. What I'm very grateful for is when my in-laws send me a message, hey, he says everything's good.
Yes, exactly.
Because one of the things that is true is that unless I have heard from him or her, or they have sent me a photo, I don't know if they're okay. And the only way I know they're okay is when they're actively communicating. And that became very clear to me when I was on the other side of it, when bad things would happen. And I had to learn really quick to send a code word home that I was okay because we don't know. And so just keeping that communication open. And the other thing, I call it like putting on a backpack and you're carrying this load and it gets heavier when they're deployed. But I'm also worried about my daughter-in-laws or my son-in-laws and my grandkids. So it's like a multiplier effect. So just keeping that communication and there's a lot of sticky things like, do you go to the homecoming and all that? And my personal policy is I go if I'm invited.
Exactly. Yes. Yes.
And otherwise I wait because I don't need to see them step down on the ground. I need a text message. Hey, I'm here. That's what I need. And so things like that, to be respectful of their family and their need to reintegrate, but also on the other side, just knowing that for me, it literally feels like I'm carrying an extra 25 pounds every time.
Yes. It's so true. And it's not a competition. And there's some things in the military spouse world that aren't very gracious towards parents and in-laws. And we're not talking obviously about people that already don't have boundaries or toxic relationships, but your typical mom and dad want to know. And it is such a heavy burden. And no, it's not affecting you as far as like it was when you were a spouse and you were raising children together in the dailiness, but you're still that parent.
Right.
And I was not prepared for how that would feel. I was kind of caught off guard, and I have a long time in military life. So especially for parents that maybe have never had any dealings with military family life, what advice would you give those parents as their child decides to go into the military? What they might not expect?
Well, the first thing is to try to get connected with a community of fellow parents, whether it's when you go to MEPS and the other parents that are there reaching out and saying, hey, how about we, stay to get connected, or if there's a Blue Star Mothers program, or online, there are some really good Facebook groups for basic training groups where you can start to connect with other parents that can help guide you. Because for me, it was a huge benefit growing up in the military. I already understand the process and I respect the process. But when you're brand new and you really don't understand why they do what they do, to find people who can help you really understand it and build those battle buddies. And that's huge. I have a small group of other mothers that I could text at 2:00 in the morning and they would be there for me because we get it. Because most of the time things are fine. But then there's an incident, there's a mishap, there's something, or you just have a really terrible dream where you just need to reach out to connect to other people. And when they're first going through basic training, that idea that this is what they've been called to do, and this is everything they're doing is making them stronger, better, changing your attitude so you're not focusing on the grief. I acknowledge the grief. There is a grief in losing your child to adulthood. Because you lose control, you lose that connection that you had with them. You used to know everything and now you don't. And really, healthy boundaries are that they do go and establish, their own identity as an adult. And we don't treat them like they're 10 years old anymore or 5 years old. But coming to grips with that, and then I say make a plan. And so my plan for example, 3 of my children went to the Naval Academy. My plan for plebe summer, I had some kind of project or something that I would work on when I was starting to feel anxious or worried about, their training, etc. And I have a plan when they deploy. I've done all kinds of things. This time I did the Baton Death March, but I've run the Marine Corps Marathon twice, and I am not by any shape. I'm not anybody who normally you would look at and go, oh, she's an athlete. I'm not at all. I look like a round grandma, but I do a lot of knitting, a lot of creative things that kind of soaks up some of that excess angst or energy that I might have. But really finding those connections that can help guide you through is really great. And the thing that you get when you're a spouse, whether it drives you crazy or not, but you are in a community.
Right.
Military parents are all over the United States. And many of them feel so isolated and really don't understand the process or what's going on. And so if you are in that position, then reach out. And the one thing I would say from a spouse, if you're in the FRG or whatever and you're getting messages, send those on. Or add, my kids used to add me to it, and depending on how effective, and they're all at different levels, but that once again, that communication and just understanding makes all the difference.
Oh, that's so true. And I don't know if you did this. I felt like when my son left and joined the military, I kind of turned around and apologized to my mother-in-law and to my parents because of things that I just hadn't thought about. So I think you're doing such a good thing. And even if you're a military spouse, you can learn from Elaine of how to maybe communicate better with your extended family and keep them just updated. Like you said, signs of life, right? that you heard from them. It just makes our whole day. It really, really does. And then you have an amazing Facebook community, right? It's the Be Safe, Love Mom.
Yep, I have a Facebook page, Be Safe, Love Mom at Elaine Brye, and the goal there is just to build community and support, encouragement. We have a common bond. I call it the sisterhood because we understand. And, we get hit with the same thing that spouses get hit with when people say silly things like, why did you let him join? Or, I know it was really hard when my daughter went to college, and you just...
Yes, it's exactly the same.
You just want to go, really?
I had an extended family member call me when my husband was in Afghanistan because they knew the base he was at. Every time, and there was a lot happening, they'd call me, Did you see on CNN? Did you see on Fox News? And I finally said, please stop bringing these things to my attention. Do you not understand? I'm trying to live in this little bubble and just survive. Right. You can't let me know every little thing that's happening.
Yes. And one of the things I do is I do limit how much I watch. I love the news, but I do limit what I watch when I have a child in the area. And well, a good example was in December, there was a terrible accident in Marine Corps Aviation, and my son was in the area. And so...
Oh my goodness, your heart just must have stopped.
For about 48 hours until we knew that all was well with him. It was pretty awful, but that's when the battle buddies came in because I just sent a text and said, this is what's going on, and I don't want to talk about it. And I didn't. I cleaned every bathroom in my house to the point where it looked, it shone, because that's how in that moment, that's what I needed to do.
Or you fall apart. I mean, really,
right?
Because you just don't know.
But I had people calling me and asking me, and I couldn't talk about it. I could not use the words because it was too real and too close. And it's not the first time that's happened. Right. My kids have lost very close friends, and we've been through some of that. That is, once again, going back to that sisterhood, when you have people who understand the stakes and how, and I always have a little bit of that guilt. Like, I know someone else's family is brokenhearted, and I grieve for them too. It's like a collective burden.
Yeah.
And we share that. Spouses, parents,
Mm-hmm.
siblings, we are carrying that all together, which is one of the reasons why I take it very personally that we need to find ways to help us stay strong on the home front. We
Yes.
matter. And our kids don't need to worry about mom. The last
Right.
thing they need to do, I always think about the beginning scene in Top Gun where he's having trouble landing on the carrier, which my son has to do that. And I hate it. I'm like, don't tell me. I don't want to know. But he's holding that picture of his wife and his baby. And I'm thinking, put that down and look at the controls. I don't want my children worrying about if mom's afraid or worried or whatever. I want them focused. Do what you're
That's
supposed
so
to
true.
do.
Yes. Focus on the mission. Well, so you've talked about community and finding, like a hobby or a project to focus on, but you've been through a lot of deployments.
Mm-hmm.
So what else would you say has helped you get through those? Because I don't I've only been through one. So with my child, and like I mentioned, it was so different than my husband, and he's already told us he's probably going again next year. And I'm just like, I can't do this again, So I've got to figure out a way to not just dwell on it too much. So what advice would you give as far as that kind of thing goes for their parents?
Well, my faith is a huge part of it. And I even, my knitting, I knit and I pray a prayer in every stitch. And
Oh, I love it.
my son says you can tell when mom has a kid deployed, her production goes way up because I have to find a quiet time just to kind of lift all that off of me. And so prayer is really important. When people say, do you get used to it? I say it's a lot like childbirth. You know what to expect, but it still hurts. And so I literally, even if you're super busy and you're raising other kids or whatever's going on in your life, I literally, it's not a normal time. So I treat it like that. I treat it as, what am I going to do this time around to kind of lift some of that burden? And sometimes, like I said, sometimes it's a physical goal. One time I walked to Afghanistan virtually.
Oh,
I just put in the
wow.
mileage to do that. Other times it's been one time I did a whole garden. I created a whole garden, but it's usually combined with something very physical because that helps me get rid of that energy or creative. But if you just try and act like everything's normal, it's not.
Right.
So treat it like that. And one of my goals is also, by the time this is over, that I feel like I've progressed in getting stronger or doing something or overcoming something. And that's what works for me. And that's what's kind of helped me. And when I look back, some are worse than others. When my youngest son went to Afghanistan last year, that was one of my worst ever. And I don't know. I don't know if it's because I know the country so well or whatever, but I mean, my daughter's been deployed there as well. But it's just, if you were going through chemotherapy, you would know that's a really hard time. And people come together to support you. It's kind of the same thing, it's a hard time. The difference is a lot of people are unaware and they don't know how to support you. But your military fellow sisters know. They know. So once again, we go back to that community.
And you have so many supportive resources for military parents. So did you want to talk about some of those on your website?
Sure. So, it all starts with my book, Be Safe, Love Mom. And on the website, I compiled different resources that you can look into. There's one section I kind of like Battles to Fight. If you want to get involved as a mom and be a positive force in the military community, or, we know we have a problem with mental health and suicide awareness or helping at the VA or taking that mama angst and putting it to a good use. Right now, one of my passions is we've got a housing crisis, and I'm just asking every military parent to call their congressman and say, I just want to make sure you're aware of what's going on with the health issues in military housing. But there are things that you can do to get to be supportive in your own community. If you were a PTO mom and you're missing all that, you can get involved that way. A listing of organizations where, like Blue Star Families, Blue Star Mothers, where you can come together. And then one of my favorite little projects that I did with Army Mom Strong is we did a journal, and it's basically a 6-month journal, Rise Up Military Moms, where you can just do some of these action steps to develop habits, to become stronger yourself, because your children they're becoming stronger. And so we can become stronger. So we're not just reacting emotionally to everything. So
that's amazing. So make sure and check out her website. It's just besafelovemom.com. And then she's also on Facebook and Instagram. Just such an amazing book, such an amazing writer. And if you're a military parent, I highly suggest you get her book, because it will help you walk through those days of deployment, or even just having your child go into the military, even if they're not deployed yet. But she's obviously been there.
Yes.
And be sure to enter the giveaway for Elaine's book, which will be on my Instagram, MilSpouse Matters. So Elaine, did you have anything else to add before we close out? I think what you're doing is amazing. Like I said, I love your book, and I'm just so happy to have you on to share your great tips and your experiences.
Well, the one thing I just would like to add for those spouses out there, I grew up in the military. I went to a different school every year, except I went to half of my junior year and my senior year together. And although a lot of that was really hard, there were so many things that I learned and so many blessings that I gained from my experience of growing up in the military and the connections in that community. And so I know it's really hard, and I know it's hard to uproot your children. And I'm watching my grandchildren. All my kids moved this last summer. We helped 3 out of 4 of them. But I just want to say there are so many good things that come from this life, even though it's difficult. And I miss that. I do miss that. And I just want to encourage you to you don't have to be perfect. Everything. I feel bad for your generation, because Facebook and Pinterest makes everybody look like, you're supposed to be just, and I just want to say, I'm just really proud of all that you do and on a daily basis. And my heart is to support you and in any way that I can as well. So.
And sometimes it's okay to just move and keep the family together and keep kids fed and bathed. And you don't have to be doing a lot of other things, because your life is already hard.
Oh, yeah. And I know that because I'm from a bigger family of 7 kids, but because we had each other, and our family became stronger because of it. And
yes.
Besides, people are photoshopping all that stuff anyway. So
they're showing the highlight reel. They're showing the highlight reel and not the down and dirty stuff, because who's going to post that, right?
Exactly.
And there's such good resources now. That's one thing. Like I like you said, sometimes I go, I'm really glad there wasn't social media when I was a younger spouse, or I would have felt like a failure every day. Mm-hmm. But on the flip side of that, there's so many ways to connect, and I really think that that's such a good thing for spouses these days. Right. And hearing from older moms like us, we're now in that category. But yeah, we're here for you. And I think too, as military spouses, ask your in-laws and your parents what they would like from you as far as communication, and just, keep those lines of communication open if you can. It's so important.
Exactly.
Well, Elaine, it has just been an absolute delight to have you on the show today and sharing your story, part of your story, and your amazing resources for military families. I'm so grateful.
Well, thank you for having me. And I love seeing what you're doing and what you're going to do in the future.
Oh, thanks. And listeners, make sure and enter the giveaway on my Instagram. We'll be giving away 1 copy of Elaine's book, Be Safe, Love Mom. And you might, if you're a military spouse, want to try to win it and give it to your in-laws or your parents. In the meantime, everybody, I hope you have a wonderful week. Thank you again, Elaine, for joining me. Bye-bye, everybody.
Connect with Jen at jenmcdonald.net or on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. You can also purchase her book, You Are Not Alone, Encouragement for the Heart of a Military Spouse at Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, and other booksellers. Love the show? Don't forget to leave a review on iTunes. Until next time, have a great week.